patrol car rolled slowly past the entrance of the Bank of America branch on Laurel Canyon Boulevard. It was just after 9:15 a.m., and the parking lot was already filling with late-morning customers. A white Chevrolet Celebrity sat idling near the curb. The officers inside the cruiser had seen the vehicle before. It matched the description from prior takeover robberies across Los Angeles. Nothing outwardly chaotic had happened yet. No alarms, no visible weapons, just a car that did not quite belong. The officers repositioned, radioed their observation, and waited. Their expectation was procedural: confirm, contain, call for additional units if necessary. Bank robberies, even armed ones, typically ended in rapid exits and vehicle pursuits. The institutional model assumed time for perimeter control and escalation to specialized teams. Inside the bank, two men were already committed to a different kind of plan. Within minutes, those parallel assumptions would collide in open daylight. What unfolded would not simply test individual response. It would expose a structural gap between evolving threats and the equipment meant to confront them. The officers did not initiate a stop immediately. Instead, they followed standard procedure for a possible robbery in progress. One unit maintained visual contact on the white sedan, while another adjusted position to observe the bank entrance. A brief radio transmission requested additional units to stage nearby. The tone was controlled, almost routine. Previous robberies involving similar suspects had followed a predictable pattern: rapid entry, intimidation, cash taken, swift departure. The working assumption was containment and coordination, not sustained engagement. No one on scene anticipated a prolonged exchange of rifle fire in an open commercial district. The expectation remained that time, distance, and layered response would manage the threat. In the late 1990s, most American patrol officers operated under a clear division of responsibility. Patrol units handled first response, scene stabilization, and perimeter control. Specialized units, including SWAT, were deployed when a situation escalated beyond routine capacity. This structure was built around probabilities. Armed robberies were dangerous, but they were typically brief. Suspects sought escape, not confrontation. Standard-issue sidearms reflected that expectation. Many departments, including the Los Angeles Police Department, had transitioned to semi-automatic pistols chambered in 9mm or .40 caliber. These handguns were reliable and suitable for close-range defensive encounters. Some patrol vehicles carried 12-gauge shotguns, often loaded with buckshot or slugs, but their deployment required time to retrieve in position. Patrol rifles were not yet common equipment. Body armor issued to officers was generally rated for handgun threats. Rifle-rated protection was uncommon outside specialized units. Training emphasized communication, cover, and coordinated containment until higher capability resources arrived. The assumption was that heavily armed suspects would either barricade or attempt to flee, creating time for structured escalation. Nationally, agencies shared similar threat models. While isolated incidents had involved high-powered rifles, they were not treated as a routine patrol expectation. Procurement, training cycles, and response doctrine reflected that broader assessment of risk. The two suspects had prepared specifically to overwhelm that structure. They constructed layered body armor from commercially available ballistic vests reinforced with metal trauma plates sewn into clothing. Protection extended across torsos, upper legs, and arms, reducing vulnerability to handgun rounds. They carried illegally modified semi-automatic rifles configured for automatic fire, chambered in rifle calibers capable of penetrating standard soft armor and most patrol vehicle panels. Each suspect brought multiple high-capacity drum and box magazines, providing sustained ammunition supply without frequent reload interruptions. Their planning focused on duration and intimidation. The expectation was not merely to escape quickly, but to outmatch responding officers long enough to control the environment. The preparation was deliberate, logistical, and centered on exploiting predictable response patterns. When the suspects exited the bank, they immediately encountered patrol units positioned across Laurel Canyon Boulevard. One officer had already drawn his sidearm, taking cover behind a parked vehicle. Within seconds, rifle fire began. The sound and volume were unlike the handgun discharges officers were accustomed to hearing. The suspects fired from the sidewalk and street, advancing deliberately rather than seeking immediate escape. The first round struck patrol cars and storefront facades. Officers returned fire with 9mm and .40 caliber pistols from distances that exceeded typical qualification scenarios. At those ranges and against layered armor, handgun rounds produced limited effect. Officers aimed for exposed areas, legs, head, and side gaps, but sustained automatic fire reduced opportunities for controlled accuracy. Several officers repositioned behind engine blocks and concrete planters, recognizing quickly that vehicle doors offered minimal protection against rifle rounds. As additional units arrived, they parked at angles to maximize cover and create crossfields while attempting to avoid overlapping lines of fire in a crowded commercial district. One suspect advanced toward officers while firing in controlled bursts, exploiting the superior range of his rifle. Another maneuvered toward the getaway vehicle. Officers adapted by retrieving shotguns from patrol trunks when possible. Slug rounds provided more penetrating capability than handguns, but effective engagement still required proximity under active fire. The exchange remained fluid. Officers coordinated through short radio updates while visually signaling movements between vehicles. The engagement stretched beyond the initial intersection, fragmenting into shifting positions along the street. The core dynamic was clear. Patrol officers were attempting containment with equipment designed for close-range defensive encounters, while facing adversaries equipped for sustained mid-range rifle engagement. Radio traffic intensified as more units converged. Injury reports, location updates, and requests for specialized resources overlapped on shared channels. Dispatch attempted to prioritize transmissions, but volume created delays. Situational awareness became dependent on fragmented updates rather than a single coordinated command post in the early minutes. Long gun availability was limited. Not every responding unit had immediate access to a shotgun, and none initially carried patrol rifles. Officers retrieving shotguns had to expose themselves briefly to open fire while accessing vehicle trunks. Ammunition capacity in shotguns required deliberate reload cycles, adding another constraint during sustained exchange. Attempts to establish a structured perimeter were complicated by the suspect's mobility. Rather than remaining fixed, they moved along sidewalks and between vehicles, forcing officers to adjust positions continually. The density of the commercial area required attention to civilian presence, further limiting aggressive maneuver. The evolving threat outpaced the doctrinal model of containment, followed by specialized escalation. The decisive factor shaping the length and intensity of the engagement was the equipment imbalance at first contact. Patrol officers arrived expecting a robbery containment scenario. Instead, they faced rifle-caliber fire from armored suspects prepared for sustained confrontation. The institutional model had not fully accounted for that possibility at the patrol level. Handguns, even when accurately placed, lacked the penetration required to reliably neutralize heavily armored targets at distance. Shotguns offered incremental improvement, but their limited range and ammunition capacity restricted sustained effectiveness. The absence of patrol rifles during the initial minutes extended the duration of exposure and forced officers into the defensive positioning. This mismatch did not reflect individual misjudgment on scene. Officers adapted within the constraints available to them. The blind spot existed at the policy and procurement level. Threat assessments had prioritized common criminal patterns, not escalation to paramilitary-style engagement in public streets. As the exchange continued, officers improvised by seeking higher-powered rifles from nearby sources and redistributing available long guns among units. That adaptation gradually narrowed the disparity. However, the early minutes demonstrated how doctrine shaped equipment and equipment shaped options. The initial imbalance dictated tempo, risk distribution, and the prolonged nature of the confrontation. As the confrontation stretched beyond half an hour, momentum gradually shifted. Additional units established wider containment, limiting the suspect's mobility. One suspect, separated from his partner, continued moving along the street while sustaining injuries that reduced his ability to maintain controlled fire. Officers maintained distance, using available cover and coordinated positioning rather than attempting a decisive forward rush. The second suspect attempted to escape in a commandeered vehicle after the original getaway car was disabled. The vehicle eventually came to a stop under concentrated return fire. Surrounded and with mobility reduced, The suspect was prevented from regaining initiative. The engagement concluded not through a single dramatic maneuver, but through accumulated pressure, containment discipline, and attrition. As gunfire ceased, the focus shifted immediately to medical response and scene control. The immediate threat ended, but the institutional implications were only beginning. In the aftermath, departments across the United States reassessed patrol-level capability. The most visible change was the accelerated adoption of patrol rifles. Agencies that had previously limited rifles to specialized units began issuing AR-15 pattern rifles to patrol officers, storing them in secured mounts inside cruisers. The objective was not militarization, but parity, ensuring first responders could counter rifle-caliber threats without waiting for specialized deployment. Body armor standards were reevaluated. While soft armor remained standard for daily wear, access to rifle-rated plates became more common for high-risk responses. Procurement cycles shifted to include upgraded ballistic protection and expanded long gun training. Doctrine also evolved. The assumption that patrol units would contain and wait for SWAT was reconsidered, particularly in scenarios involving active, mobile threats. Training increasingly emphasized coordinated immediate response by first arriving officers rather than static perimeter models alone. Communication protocols were refined to reduce channel congestion during major incidents, and command structures were adjusted to establish unified control more rapidly. Ammunition selection, weapons maintenance programs, and qualification standards were reviewed to reflect longer engagement distances. The North Hollywood incident became a case study in academy curricula and in-service training nationwide. It demonstrated that rare threat profiles, if unaccounted for, could create disproportionate institutional vulnerability. Preparation models expanded accordingly. Agencies began planning not only for the most likely scenario, but for the most consequential one. That morning began with a patrol car rolling slowly past a bank entrance, guided by assumptions shaped by past experience. Within minutes, those assumptions proved incomplete. The event did not redefine courage or commitment. Those were already present. It redefined preparedness. Institutions evolve under pressure. When evidence reveals that equipment, doctrine, or expectations no longer align with emerging threats, adaptation becomes mandatory. The lesson extends beyond a single city or decade. Planning cannot rely solely on what has already happened. It must account for what could happen next. If you value disciplined, institutional analysis over spectacle, subscribe to Pressure and Policy. This channel examines the decisions that shaped history and the policy shifts that followed, so we can better understand how institutions learn under pressure.